Hello and welcome to Hamer Reviews. My name is Christopher Hamer and today we're going to be reviewing the Nikon Z7 II. Now Z7 II was announced alongside the Z6 II towards the end of last year and was released in December 2020. That being said, there are supply constraints at the moment, so it is hard to get hold of, though I've actually rented this one so I can spend some time with it and get an idea of what it's like. It is the high megapixel variant of Nikon's current Z lineup, so it has a 45 megapixel sensor, which is pretty impressive. It has in-body image stabilization, it's capable up to 5 frames per second shooting, it has eye autofocus, but we're going to go into lots more details on those, plus some interesting video features such as 4K 60 frames per second. It is of course compatible with all of Nikon's Z lenses, plus you can use the F to Z adapter so that you can shoot with various f-mount lenses as well. But let's go into things in a bit more detail. So first off, I like to start off with the ergonomics of a camera because I think that can really define how enjoyable it is to use. In terms of physical ergonomics, the camera feels great to hold. I really like what Nikon's done with the Z line, and this is just a incremental update from the Z7. Some buttons have been moved, some things have changed slightly, but there's not any massive changes, and I think that's a good thing. The Z7 and Z6 were lovely cameras, and they've just continued this with the Z6 II and Z7 II, so the Z7 II here is really enjoyable to use. You have the same command dial on the top, which allows you to change the modes. You have a dedicated record button alongside the shutter button. You've got an ISO button and exposure compensation all on the top panel, plus a nice OLED panel so you can see your current settings. On the back, you have a pretty good sized screen. It's getting a bit small now, I think. It does articulate outwards to facilitate being able to see things when you're shooting, though it's not fully articulating as some have, so you can't flip it out and see yourself. But I don't think this is that kind of camera where they're kind of thinking you'd have that anyway. There's also a good amount of other buttons plus a nice large touchscreen. And you have the custom buttons all over it too. So overall, ergonomically, it feels good and it's nice in the hand, easy to use. In terms of digital ergonomics, so let's say the user interface, I like Nikon's menu system. I'm very comfortable using it. The Z7 II provided me with no challenges, having previously used the Z50, Z6 and Z6 II. So that was no bad thing. Overall, I liked it and it was a good menu system, and I think it's one of the simpler ones on the market today. I certainly prefer it over Sony's. Then we can go into image quality and that wonderful sensor. So 45 megapixels is great. There is no anti-aliasing filter over that sensor, so you can really enjoy the full quality that you can get from Nikon's Z lenses. The ISO performance is really good. So the base ISO is ISO 64, though it's expandable up to 25,600, and you can even go above that if you want, though personally I wouldn't. I have tried it in a number of situations. ISO 64 looks fantastic. I went out shooting at night as well, and did some low light photography with high ISO. And it performed really well in my opinion. As you can see from some of the photographs, I think that the high ISO performance of the Z7 II is surprisingly good. I think it's perfectly usable above ISO 3200, which is not something I necessarily expected from this camera. So Nikon's done a good job managing that. I think in part that's due to the dual X-speed processors that they've put in here, and a bit of tweaking. So overall, I think from what I've seen, the ISO performance of the Z7 II is actually slightly better than the Z7, but that's just from my personal experience. I didn't have a huge amount of time hands-on with the Z7, so it is limited experience, but I get the feeling like they're slightly better. But either way, very usable and very enjoyable. When you're shooting, you can shoot at up to 5.5 frames per second. It's expandable above that, but you lose metering and autofocus, so I'd kind of stick with that. This isn't like a sports camera. I don't think it pretends to be either, but it's good actually. I did go out shooting some birds and doing some wildlife photography. Not great photographs, but the actual use of it I thought was really good. I was pretty impressed. It was easy to use. That I didn't feel like I was losing the amount of frames because it wasn't fast enough. The buffer is actually really impressive. You can take 77 photos in 12-bit RAW, but obviously you lose a few if you're shooting 14-bit, which I was, but I never filled the buffer, so that wasn't something I was majorly concerned about. Talking about autofocus, I think the autofocus on the Z7 II is great. It's not fantastic in terms of as good as, say, the current Sonys and even the current Canons, but the eye autofocus worked well. It doesn't work from the same distance, I feel, as some of those other cameras, but I didn't have any issues with it. I was shooting with it quite happily. The animal autofocus does leave a little to be desired, as you're seeing at the moment. It doesn't always catch it bang on, but overall, I actually thought it did a good job. So both the autofocus for humans or objects worked well, and animals was all right. There's clearly stuff Nikon can do to improve that, and you've got the dual X-speed sensor processors in here. And if I think back to the Z6 and the firmware updates we got between version 1 and version 3, and we're currently, at version 1.1 on the Z7 II, I would expect to see a pretty big jump in performance over the next couple of years as Nikon updates the firmware, tweaks it, and optimizes it. If we don't, I will be disappointed, because I think it is the kind of thing Nikon should be doing. They did it for the Z6 and Z7, and I think a lot of people expect them to do it for the Z7 II and Z6 II. So hopefully we'll watch this space and see improvements. So although it is very good autofocus, it is not the best on the market. There is room for improvement, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you Nikon has the best autofocus of anyone, but I do think it's very usable. There are some tweaks that people have talked about to sort of get the best out of it. So one of the things is you can now use eye autofocus within the wide box, which is good. Obviously, it means the camera only has to focus on a smaller area to find the eye and focus on it. Though personally, I mostly use full frame eye detection rather than the box version. Equally, you can use standard dynamic autofocus settings as well, like single point, etc. if you want. So you have lots of choices. I think the autofocus is good. It's not the best, but it's very usable. In line with that, we should probably talk about video. Now, video is interesting on the Z7 II. The Z6 initially was kind of touted as the main video choice in Nikon's mirrorless lineup, but in some ways that feels like it's shifted slightly. It hasn't shifted all the way, but it's certainly, there's some odd things going on here. So the Z6 II launched without 4K 60. That's coming in a firmware update, hopefully this or next month. The Z7 II already has 4K 60. I was really excited to try it. I thought this could be a really cool thing to look at, see if I actually really enjoy using it or not. But there's a lot of limitations. You can only shoot 4K 60 internally in 8-bit. That's not something I expected to see, to be honest with you. The crop is minor, it's about 1.1, but even then, not being able to shoot 10-bit to my Atomos recorder was disappointing. Equally, that's the same for 4K 50, but once you get to 4K 30, you can shoot in 10-bit NLog to an Atomos recorder, which is nice. Again, you get a nice high-speed full HD video, so 120 frames per second, which the camera can automatically slow down in the camera too. So you could do slow it down by 5 times, so you get 24 frames per second at 1080p, just slowed down quite massively. So that's a good thing. The Atomos can't take those either, but that's no surprise to me. It's just the 4K 60 that seemed odd not to be able to shoot to NLog. Video quality is good. It's not as good as the Z6 II. It's just the nature of having such a high megapixel sensor. That being said, shooting at those higher frame rates, so 1080p 120, does crop down to the DX size sensor on here, and I thought the image quality there was very good in video. But yeah, 4K is great, but it's not as good as Z6 II. I think the autofocus in video is good. Again, the same things apply about the eye autofocus that I said before. I think it's a very enjoyable camera to use, and I think the autofocus is good. So in video, this is a capable camera. You do have a mic input. You also have headphone outputs, which is great. The built-in microphones are not great. They never have been on Nikon's cameras. The inbuilt amplifier, I think, is to blame there because it's adds quite a lot of noise, quite noisy. So personally, if you're going to seriously use this video, I would record the audio separately. and then feed it into, say, an Atomos recorder, rather than using the inbuilt audio in this, even if you're using an external mic. That being said, if you do need to use an external mic, it's not horrendous, it's just not as good. Other things about this camera that I think are worth talking about. So if you're going to be shooting with it, obviously you're getting quite large file sizes because of that high megapixel sensor. I think it's important that you choose high quality lenses to go with it. It clearly can show up issues with lenses. So if lenses aren't as sharp as you thought they were, you will notice when you're shooting with this. I shot with an older 24-70 2.8G, the non-VR version, so it's getting on a bit, and the performance was certainly noticeable between that and the 24-70 2.8S that I've mostly been using. So if you're going to, buy one of these, make sure you are using a nice high quality lens to go with it. Nikon Z lineup is very good, and I do think it works fantastically with this camera. Though obviously there are some great f-mount lenses you may want to use with the f to Z adapter as well. You do get a battery grip that you can buy for this. So you can either use the NBN10, which was announced for the Z6 and Z7. That just gives you 2 batteries and increased battery life, which we'll cover in a second. But you can also get the NBN11. Now the NBN11 was long awaited. It uses contacts inside the battery grip to give you control of the camera. So you get a shutter button and a joystick. And I think that's the one that a lot of people wanted. Again, 2 batteries as well. That being said, I cannot get one for love nor money. I had them pre-ordered in 2 different places. One of them just cancelled the pre-order outright and the other one still hasn't shipped. And I think I ordered that back in October. So yeah, there's clearly some issues getting that out. Hopefully we'll all be able to buy one if we want to soon, but at the moment you can't. Battery life is good. So this uses the EN EL15C batteries rather than the B variants, which came with the Z6 and Z7. It's a good battery. It gives you officially 480 pictures before running out. You will get much more in reality though. I shot over 1,000 frames on one battery without any issues. So that's what I'd kind of expect shooting with it, unless you really are using the screen and EVF a lot. But overall, yep, 1,000 frames completely achievable. I think that's perfectly good battery life. You can also power this by USB-C, which is nice. So just plug in a battery pack and run the camera. So that's a nice touch from Nikon. And I think all of us have USB-C battery packs these days. So good to have that available as a choice if you want it. It also has 2 card slots. I'm sure that will make everyone incredibly happy that complained about it. So that's one of the main changes of the body, is you have this much larger door to accommodate an SD card slot as well. Congratulations Nikon for including that. So the SD card slot and XQD/CF Express card slots will mean you can run 2 forms of storage in here, which will make a lot of people happier that were so nervous about losing their photographs. I never really worried about it. It never bothered me, but yep, you can use them. I'm going to do some more testing soon, but I think you're going to get much higher speeds out of the XQD/CF Express slot than you did out of the Z6. The one thing I noticed with the Z6 and Z7 was that you could put a CF Express card in them once the firmware update came out, but you actually saw lower speeds than you did over XQD. That doesn't appear to be the case on the Z7 II, so that's good. You do have the same EVF as the Z7, so it's about 3 million pixels. I've seen people complain and go, oh, on such a high megapixel camera, why do we not have a higher quality EVF? And that is something that Sony and Canon have both done with their newer cameras. Perhaps it's an issue. I didn't see it as one. I love the EVF in these cameras. I've really enjoyed using them, whether it's on the Z7 II or on my Z6 II. It looks great, and I never felt wanting. If I wanted to magnify in, I could do and look at the image at 100%. I didn't feel like I was not being able to see enough. Maybe it's something that we'll see Nikon do in the future cameras, but I like the EVF on here. I think I mentioned that the screen could be a little bit higher resolution. It's about 2 megapixels at the moment, so that's something that Nikon kind of hopefully we'll look at soon. But yeah, I think the EVF in these cameras are still among the best I've used. But obviously I haven't used the latest and greatest from Canon and Sony yet, so maybe my opinion will change on that soon. So yeah, the Z7 II, great image quality, as you've hopefully seen from the sample images. good video quality, as you've hopefully seen from the sample video. It's a nice camera to use. I don't have a huge amount of gripes with it. I'm just thinking, like, what would I change if I could change anything? Well, maybe Nikon needs to start thinking about changing the image sensor in here because it's getting a little outdated, though I think the performance you're getting out of it is great. Ergonomically, I'd really not want them to change a huge amount, to be honest. I'm quite happy. At least you have the choice of that grip now as well. It's an enjoyable camera to use. At times, I think the autofocus could be improved, and hopefully we'll see firmware updates that improve it more, and perhaps we'll have to wait for future iterations to really get big gains. But given the change that I experienced with the Z6, as that got updated, I'm really hopeful that the autofocus is going to be much better in a year's time than it is today, and I'm hoping I'm going to be able to, you know, get one of these again, and maybe I'll own one by then, and have another look and see how that autofocus has improved. Because Nikon did a lot with the Z6, and it stands to reason they should be doing the same with the Z7 II and Z6 II as well. Video modes, it's not the best, and if you're going to be shooting video primarily and don't always need high megapixels, you should be considering the Z6 II. One of the small touches that I did notice, which is kind of nice, and the Z6 II has this as well, is that you now can expand the shooting time to 900 seconds rather than 30 seconds being the maximum before you get to bulb. So that's quite nice, and that's a nice little touch if you want to be shooting super long exposures internally. So that's another plus point for the Z7 II. So yeah, that's what I think of the Z7 II. Obviously, there's a lot of change going on at the moment, and I can't ignore the Canon EOS R5, the Sony Alpha 1 that was announced very recently. Those two cameras are kind of, it feels like rewriting the rulebook, but in the case of the Alpha 1, it costs more than double the £3,000 that this costs. And there is an argument to be made of, are you getting that much better value? Maybe you are, because it is kind of a high megapixel, almost sports body. But there's something to be thought about here. I'd say the natural competitor in Sony's lineup is probably the A9. Well, it isn't probably, it is the A9. In terms of Canon, I'm not so sure. The R5 is still a lot more expensive than the Z7 II. And it's certainly not the R6 going up against this, or indeed the R. So it's interesting, but it's hard not to draw parallels between those cameras and this one. If you look at the Alpha 1 and you look at the R5, you look at the 8K recording, you look at the video features, you look at some of the frame rates, etc. they're getting, the improvements in blackout time, etc. It's quite clear that competition is hotting up, and there are things that Nikon will need to do over the next few years to remain competitive. And I look forward to seeing what those things are. You hear rumors about a Z8 and Z9, and you hear rumors about, you know, the latest developments Nikon's making. It'll be interesting to see what Nikon's next moves are. But for now, I think the Z7 II is a really good camera. And if you're considering buying one, I can only recommend it. If you have any questions about the Z7 II, feel free to pop them in the comment section below. I'll try and help if I can. Equally, if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, always helps. And if you haven't already, please subscribe, really appreciate it. And the more of you that subscribe, the better. Thank you very much for watching, and I do hope I see you again next time. Goodbye.